Hey everybody, welcome back to our third episode of the Neutral Zone. It is Friday, March the 1st. We've officially flipped the calendar from February to March and flipped everything into the NHL stretch drive. We want to welcome everybody out there. Welcome ladies, gentlemen, Islanders fans. We just wanted to specifically shout out to Islanders fans with everything that happened this week. Without further ado, let's get going.
He shoots. He scores.
You're listening to the Neutral Zone with Brad and Mark, coming at you from the land of the free.
Like I said, here we are in our third episode. I'm here with my co-host, Mark, the Gordie Howe hat-trick king, Peterson. If everybody out there and listening to this podcast doesn't believe me, trust me, Mark is a beast. He will go out on the ice, score a beauty bar-down goal, throw down a nice little celly, then come out in the next shift and drop the gloves with the biggest guy on the ice. Doesn't matter if it's on his team or the other team. It's just, at that point, it's just about message sending time. How you doing, Mark?
What's happening, Brad? That's awesome. I feel like I should be playing in the NHL nowadays with it.
You should be.
You know what? My draft year should have been Sidney Crosby year. And had I still been playing, because I had to quit because of injuries, but if I was still playing, Crosby would have went number 2 that year. Hands down.
No question. Prototypical power forward, Mark Peterson.
Absolutely. I was built for the 2000s, early 2000s.
You were, definitely. So we're going to, like I said, we're going to start out our third episode. We're going to talk about the Mcdavid hit that happened, like I said, a couple weeks ago now, I believe it was, where Connor Mcdavid of the Edmonton Oilers was suspended 2 games for a blindsided headshot hit, which resulted in a lot of controversy. And then also we're going to touch a little bit on the Chara hit that happened here just a few days ago that resulted in a fight between him and Evander Kane, which is a pretty big heavyweight tilt. So pass it over to Mark here to start off. What did you think about, let's start with the Mcdavid hit, Mark. What did you think about that hit when it happened?
Well, my instant reaction was it had to end up in a suspension. And when the suspension came across and they handed down a two-gamer, I wasn't surprised at all. But then the next day or so, I started to see a lot of news stories out and talking to a lot of people around town who are Oilers fans, and they obviously voiced a displeasure for it. And then when the NHL starts to talk about it, and TSN and Sportsnet also start to weigh in on it, saying whether they thought it was a legal or illegal hit, it really started to kind of make me wonder about the whole thing.
Yeah, I'd agree, yeah.
So you definitely started to watch it a couple more times, probably 100 times, I'm not even joking, just to see what they could have saw. And it made me do a little bit of my own research and start to dig into what categorizes a legal hit to illegal hit.
For sure.
Just taking a look, I don't want to bore you guys with all the details like this, but Rule 48 is the statutory in the rule book where it talks about headshots. And it says, a hit resulting in contact with an opponent's head was the main point of contact, and such contact was available is not permitted. Okay? Throughout the year so far, we've had about 6 suspensions handed down. Mark Burakovsky got 3 games, Brandon Lemieux got 2 games, Josh Archibald, Erik Karlsson, and David Bax all got 2 to 3 games for their headshots.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you go back and you watch every single one of those hits, they all look exactly identical to what Mcdavid delivered on Nick Leddy that night.
Yeah.
The only hit that was any different throughout the year was the Tom Wilson one at the beginning of the year, which was a 20-gamer.
Yeah.
And when you watch that one, it was very, very serious, and it really could have injured the player.
Plus, he has history, right? Tom Wilson's got a history of suspensions, so
He has, yeah. And when I started looking back and looking at all these suspensions, you definitely see through the last year or two where Tom Wilson pops up a lot.
Yeah.
From slashing to boarding to hitting the head and all sorts of things like that.
Yeah, he's got a reputation, I think, and I think that had a big part
Yeah.
in why he was suspended 20 games.
I think Connor McDavid getting 2 games was completely justifiable.
I believe so too. That might not be popular with the Oilers fans. However, I don't think you can, we'll talk about this a little bit later with the Chara hit. I don't think you can make exceptions based on the player or team. And I think that even though it was Connor McDavid's first foray into having a hearing really and being suspended, I think it was the right call. And I would say that regardless of what team he was on.
Well, and I think that's where it is at too. Is it's Connor McDavid, but I'm not just saying it's Connor because it's Connor. It's a star player of a team that is in a hunt for a last playoff spot still.
It had big consequences to it,
and they played 2 big games without him, where they could have needed him, and it looked like they needed him.
Yeah, it's you saw a lot of memes out there, and it's hard not to chuckle at them, where they have pictures of Connor McDavid and saying first time in NHL history where the whole team got suspended at the same time.
Yeah.
It's
sad,
a low blow.
But true.
It's true, though. Mm-hmm. He carries that team a lot of weight. Draisaitl is a big part of the team as well.
Yeah.
If you lose one of those guys, though, it's definitely a big blow.
And you know what? If this was something that happened earlier in the year, say 10, 20 games in, I don't think it would have been such a big deal. But I think that it gets blown out of proportion because you're taking a captain, a point leader, an amazing elite athlete on the ice. You're taking him and you're putting him up in the box, not where you want him. When at the time, I think they were only about 5 points out of the playoffs. So they still had a chance, but they had to string together some wins. In order to do that, they got to have Connor McDavid on the ice.
I think also another big part of it for Oilers fans is if you watch the games that they play in, McDavid does take a lot of abuse. I mean, he's obviously the sole focus of a lot of the teams that face him because he's such a dynamic talent that he's going to take a lot of abuse, and he has, and then sometimes a lot of that abuse goes uncalled. I think if they seriously called it by the book with McDavid, there'd be penalties on almost every shift with him because of his speed, his ability to handle the puck. So I think that ruffles the feathers in Edmonton a little the wrong way. And then when you add on him getting a suspension for his first ever incident, then this is what we saw is what you get, right?
That's right.
Even though it's pretty hard to argue that hit should deserve the suspension, and it did.
He leans into the guy a bit, and the defense is that he was trying to finish a check, but it's tough to try to change your mind in that split second. We see it in slow motion and then make it seem really easy to do.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're on the ice, everything happens fast. But this is the way the rule book's written, and you need to be aware of these situations. And if you're going in and you're about to hit a guy's head, something's got to tell you that brain of yours to start withdrawing what you're doing.
And it's a learning situation for McDavid because, like you said, split second in such a fast game, it's tough to pull back on that hit. So you have to do some precautionary steps, I think, before you're coming into a situation like that. Like as you're coming into the other player, you need to make sure you have the ability to steer away from it. So it's a situation I'm sure he'll learn from. Oh. And I don't think there's obviously any intention there. I don't think Connor McDavid's a dirty player. Mm-hmm. I don't think he meant to hurt a guy. I just think it was a play that happened, and you see it happen quite often. Yeah, and when it happens, you have to punish it.
I believe McDavid when he says about all that too is he didn't mean to hit. He didn't want to hit him in the head. He doesn't want to hurt him, right?
Yeah,
I believe all that.
Yeah. So as for the next hit, though, moving on to the Chara hit, what did you think of that one?
Well, see, that's a funny thing too, because when you watch the Chara hit, it's along the boards, and he comes in fairly aggressive on him, and there is still contact made to the head. It's not the focal point of contact at first, but the head definitely takes a punishment. I thought there should have been a game suspension, at least handed down for this one, because Chara's a big guy, and he comes in way too fast on him. It could have been a charging penalty, at least for the most, but there was nothing.
Definitely.
It did get me thinking about Chara because he's such a big guy like that, and as to whether he's ever been suspended for a hit.
So you were telling me you looked into that a little bit, right? Yeah.
When you Google if he's ever been suspended for, the story that pops up is the Max Pacioretty hit back in 2011.
Pretty infamous hit.
Where he gets absolutely creamed into that stanchion.
And it changed
between the boxes.
I mean, it's one of those events that changed the actual stanchions in the NHL. Now all the stanchions at those benches are rounded, right? And it's all because of that incident. So it's a pretty big incident in the recent history of the NHL.
Yeah, that's right.
So has he ever been suspended?
He's never been suspended.
Serious?
For nothing. I couldn't find anything. And I had looked 15 years back into suspensions in the NHL, looking at every single one, to see that he's never got suspended for anything. And the guy's laid out a lot of bodies.
Well, he's a big, physical, hard-nosed player. So that's, it's tough when you're playing a game like that to walk the line and not get a suspension. So that is fairly surprising.
So does the NHL allow leeway for a guy like Zdeno because he's so big and it's hard for him to avoid the head at all times?
That's probably the most likely scenario, I would think. If you ask anybody who's a fan of anybody but Boston, there's those fans out there who are playing in the same division. They would probably have a more of a conspiracy theory. I mean, I've read before in the past that the owner is one of the closest owners to Gary Bettman. So that would probably be a theory that it has something to do with how close he is to their owner is to Gary Bettman. So that could be it. I think it's more likely what you said, though, that he's such a big body that they're trying to give him a little bit of leeway. However, is that really the right thing to be doing?
Well, and my thought was, I think you should suspend him and start teaching him a lesson. But then how do you make Chara hit differently?
You can't. It's not like he's doing anything illegal.
You can't come in that fast. Well, listen, if the play's that fast, he's going in fast.
Yeah.
Right? And then you can't tell Chara that he's got to reinvent his hitting.
Well, you can't. I mean, pretty much you'd have to tell him that, hey, you can't hit. Because what player in the NHL is not at his, elbow level or below, with how tall he is, or his shoulder level or below.
He's 6'9".
Yeah,
I don't know if that's on skates or not.
Well, and Evander Kane is not a small dude.
He's 6'2" himself.
6'2", 6'3", big guy. So, he was leaning down a little bit, reaching for the puck. He was in a vulnerable position. So again, that's one of those things we talked about with Mcdavid.
But as we kind of state in the rule too, they do say that if it's avoidable, they should try.
Yeah, and that's what it is.
So whether
right?
you're that big or not, there was zero intention that Chara was trying to move. Chara was going in full steam like an engine. Okay?
And they had some history in that game. I mean, it had built and built and built and built, right?
And that's what I see is he did not attempt to get around that at all. He was going in there. And Evander Kane is kind of a marked target, like you said, through the game, and just his reputation. He takes with him everywhere he plays, right? Yeah,
he rubs some people the wrong way. He ruffles feathers.
Let's say that
another guy,
Zdeno Chara laying out Connor McDavid in the
corner.
Oh
boy! I mean, that would be a very interesting. I don't want to ever see it happen. Mm-hmm. It would be a very interesting discussion.
Do you think the league just kind of lets us drop a little bit faster, or maybe not the league, but the community of forums and debaters out there across social media kind of let this drop because Evander Kane does have a bit of an attitude problem,
I think so. And I don't know if you saw some of his tweets after it came down that the Chara wasn't getting suspended. Did you see any of those?
Yeah.
Like he had one that had little, animated 3 blind mice. He was vocal on social media after the fact that there was no suspension. Mm-hmm. So I think that doesn't win him any points.
No,
he's probably a fan favorite. I mean, I haven't really monitored the Sharks and how their fan base feels about it. I imagine he's a fan favorite there because he sticks up for teammates. He's physical on the ice. He plays a hard-nosed game. Plus, he's a great offensive player.
I think if you can say to yourself, when we play that team, I hate playing that guy because he's aggressive and he's gritty and dirty and I hate him, right?
Yeah.
I think when you say that about a guy, you would love for him to be on your team.
Definitely. And I think there's a handful of guys like that in the NHL. You have Brad Marchand, who takes that to another level. He's raised it to an art form. Mm-hmm. You have Matthew Tkachuk out of Calgary, who guys love to hate him too.
That's right.
Would you read you read about what their teammates say about him, and they love those guys. Mm-hmm. It's the old adage, right? Like you just said, you hate to play against them, you love to play with them.
That's right.
So I think that's what it boils down to. And I mean, as bad as these two hits are to have happened in the last couple weeks, I think it's good to keep the discussion about concussions in the forefront and doing whatever we can to prevent them in the game, right?
And I think that's what this is about as well, is preventing concussions.
Yeah.
So whether you're 5'9" or 6'9", hitting guys into the board, headshots should be a zero tolerance. And I'm sorry, Zdeno Chara, for you being so tall, but I don't think this should give the guy any leeway at all either.
I think he should have been suspended. Definitely one game at least. I don't think it was as bad as McDavid's, but I think it was, and McDavid's wasn't terrible, so I think it deserved one game and a fine. So, but yeah, let's move on to the next topic. If that's everything, we'll talk next about actually. You want to touch first on the Toronto and New York game that happened here a couple nights ago?
We could, sure.
Yeah, let's do that. So, big game. I mean, if you didn't know what happened, if you didn't see any of the highlights, you're probably living under a rock because it was all over the media. John Tavares, after signing a huge free agent contract to come back home to Toronto in the offseason, what some will view as he snubbed the Islanders and their fans. The fans had a pretty strong response. And if you haven't seen the highlights, I encourage you to go on to any of the local, like any Sportsnet or TS or anything like that. I'm sure they have highlights of it. The fans were on him from the start. So did you get to watch the game, Mark?
I watched a little bit of it.
Yeah, what did you think?
I think the most interesting thing was the pregame with the tailgating outside, where there was burning of jerseys to jerseys being taped to the road and driven over, to all kinds of chants. People were selling shirts and had Trader tattooed over, taped over the name Tavares on their jersey.
I think some people actually went as far as getting a custom jersey done, like a full-on really? NHL quality jersey done with Trader on it, right?
And they took the AI out and put the 9-1 in for the Trader. And it was intense. That game was awesome to watch. The fans of the Islanders were very energetic, and were cheering their team on like it was a Stanley Cup final game. It was loud and very amazing in that building. When 91 got to have his first shift of the game and touch that puck, they let him know, and they didn't stop all game long.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to see the game because of blackouts. So I did see the highlights though, and I watched. They had a little loop, I guess you'd call it, on Sportsnet, where they had all the different chants that the fans were throughout the game, like "Where's your jammies?" in reference to the picture of him in his Toronto Maple Leafs pajamas. Did you see some of these?
No, I didn't see that one.
Where's your jammies? They said, "It's your bedtime." What else did they say? They had some very creative chants.
It's your bedtime.
Obviously, they had "We don't need you." So
yeah,
it was I don't think I've seen a game that with that much venom from the fan base towards the guy. Mm-hmm. So, and something we can get into here in a second of whether it's warranted or not. It was wild. It was a playoff atmosphere on steroids, really. I mean, I don't think I've seen a playoff game that crazy in terms of the fan base.
It was, and I tell you, it was a major must-win game for kind of both teams, just in correlation to where they want to be standing in the playoffs. You know, Toronto would love to have home ice advantage over the Boston Bruins, who seems inevitably to face them. The Islanders are trying to keep their spot as well, with the Washington Capitals coming up on the end of them as well. So it was 2 points that both teams really wanted. And, it was an intense game out of the gate. I think that the ramblings and the booing and all that, I think it was deserved. You know, they have every right in their mind to voice their opinion over what they would like to say about it, right?
They pay the ticket prices. They can do what they want.
That's right. Some of those chants, I think, are getting a little carried away.
Yeah,
But
to say the
they're-
least.
They're a little funny, I think. Right?
You have to, and his teammates and they were chuckling about it afterwards because they were fairly creative. My take on it is, I can see from both sides of it how, I can understand where the fans are coming from. I get that he was your best player. He left. He said that he wanted to stay. He wanted to be in Long Island for his whole career. And then in the offseason, he went to Toronto. I get that. The thing is, and everybody's saying, oh, traitor, you're a snake, you lied. I think what needs to happen is they should stop and consider that when he said those things, maybe he meant them. And things change, right? I mean, maybe he meant at the time, halfway through the season, when he said, I want to stay here, I plan on staying here, that was the plan. And then the contract that he was looking for just didn't get offered, maybe. Or, we don't know the inner workings, what happened behind the scenes. If he had, only John Tavares and maybe a close few people to him know if he intended to ever stay. So we can't judge that. I think the biggest thing is and we've talked about this in our last our first two episodes, is the NHL and contracts and the way players are looking at it, we believe is changing, right? So this is really just the first time we're seeing something like this, at least in a long time in the NHL. You see guys move all the time in other sports, and it's not treated as much of a big deal. I mean, the fans still get on them a little bit. This, I think, was taken to a whole new level. And like you said, the Islanders fans have every right to boo and do whatever they want. What I thought last night when I watched the highlights, and where I would draw the line, is when throwing snakes on the ice at him, throwing a jersey at him as he's walking off of warm-ups. Yeah. That stuff, I think, is taking it a little too far. So that would be my take on it.
That sounds like a bit of a public stoning.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
To look at, and throwing the snakes and jerseys, that should be a no-no. I did want to say, though, too, to look at it from John's side, is that he gave the first 10 years of his career to that team. He did sign a contract to stay with them a while back after his entry-level one was done. Okay, he wanted to be an Islander. He gave you the 10 years. He gave you an awesome captain, a real franchise player that could have been there forever, But you didn't help him along the way. You didn't give him a competitive team. You didn't help him to get to the playoffs every year. They never had goaltending until this year. They missed out on a lot of things, and I think that Tavares has dreams that he wants to win a Stanley Cup during his time in the NHL, just like I think everybody does when they come along.
And play for his home team.
His favorite
team when he was growing up.
And I think he just saw that the light at the end of the tunnel was too far away with the Islanders, and felt like he had a better chance elsewhere. Now, who could predict the Islanders are where they are right now?
Exactly.
That being said, they are ranked 22nd in the league offensively, so they are missing him, right?
Yeah, it's just their defense has been so good. Their goaltending has been so good.
Exactly. So it's tough. I'm sure Tavares now is glad that game's out of the way, and every single game he returns, he will be booed. But I don't think to the same measures as to what
I think it'll get less and less as time goes on.
What I do want to see him do next time he goes is get a hat trick and help things along, just to rub it in the wounds a little more.
I don't think it helped him or the Leafs to lose 6-1 like they did.
No,
it made a tough situation. There was an already tough situation tougher.
I believe the other meeting with the Islanders earlier in the year was in Toronto, and I think the Islanders won that game something like 5-0 as well.
They did, and really, there's just teams that are like that for every team. And it can be, sometimes it's a bottom feeder, sometimes it's one of the great teams. You look back at, let's say, the Calgary Flames, for example. They lost how many games in a row over how many years in Anaheim, and then finally were able to break that curse. You look at any team, every year there's always just one of those teams that's built the right way. Even if they're not good against most other opponents, they have your number.
I think that also down the roadway in the future, when John Tavares retires, that I think he's just going to be such a great player from here on out, whether he sticks out with the Toronto Maple Leafs the rest of his career or not. I think that it might be one of those numbers in the end that get retired.
That's probably true, yeah.
And it'll be in the banners of the Toronto Maple Leafs arena and probably in the Islanders. One day he'll return and they will be cheering. It's just going to take a while.
Probably. On the eve of Jerome McGinley's jersey retirement, which is tomorrow night, I pictured it being like that for Tavares too, probably. That he will come back to the island at some point and make amends. So, you look at Patrick Waugh, that's another situation that was like that. He left the Montreal Canadiens on a bad note and then was able to reconcile that to some extent. So yeah, I think we've talked about that one as much as we should. So let's move on. Obviously, we just, like we said in the intro, we just came out of the trade deadline. We're at that point in the season now where, we talked about comparing the trade deadline day to Christmas. If that's Christmas, I think where we're at now is much like Boxing Day. Everyone's excited to watch the stretch drive, but let's be serious. Their focus is a little bit on something that's in the future, which is the playoffs, which are just around the corner, which in that scenario is much like New Year's Eve, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You got New Year's Eve coming up. We got the playoffs coming up. Everybody's excited about that. So as much as you need to focus on these next 19, 20 games for each team, the playoffs is kind of what everybody's starting to really think about, right? You mentioned there before that Toronto's probably going to be facing Boston. You're starting to see those first-round matchups become clearer. So we're going to touch a little bit on it. I'm going to pass it over to Mark here, let him kind of run the show now with trades. And we'll touch on some of the trades that went down and how we think they're going to affect the team. So what do you have up to start us, Mark?
Well, I don't know about you, Brad, but I was definitely satisfied with the trade deadline day we finally had this year. How did you feel?
I liked it. We've obviously had trade deadlines where there was a lot more moves in the past. Mm-hmm. None that were as big as, not the volume of big trades that we had this year, though. So it was exciting.
No, not as nearly as much. This year, just on the deadline only, okay, we had 22 in trades involving 25 teams. Only 5 of them stood idle. It was Chicago, Dallas, Edmonton, New York Islanders, and Tampa Bay Lightning. Dallas was active the day before, right. We all know, but
we know what happened there.
Exactly. And teams that involved the most moves, I thought this was, I was actually kind of shocked by it, but then when you look into it, it happened. Winnipeg had 6 moves.
On deadline day?
Yeah, on deadline day.
Yeah, I guess a lot of them were smaller moves after the fact, right?
Moves, right? Florida came in with 4. They had some little minor adjustments as well.
Yeah. And
Columbus Blue Jackets, who were one of the most active teams as well, they came in with 3.
We didn't see that one coming.
No,
we were wrong on that one, folks.
Oh, I tell you, I thought that Columbus would be a seller in a major way, and just say, you know what?
I was with you on that one.
We're not winning this year, and not that we're going to not win this year. They're saying we're not going to win next year because we can't bring Panarin back, and Bobrovsky doesn't want to come back. So I was thinking, trade it away and get some assets.
Well, and Panarin was my big pick, right?
Yeah.
He was the guy I was sure was going to get traded.
And even down to the deadline, even after seeing them go get Duchesne and all that, I still thought there might be a chance that they move him. Because there was names getting tossed around, traded him to Florida for Hoffman and things like that. And I thought that would be a fantastic fit back in Columbus. And then you also have somebody that can be re-signed next year that might want to play with you, right?
Yeah.
And giving them kind of a little glimpse into your hockey and how you play it and such might help, something like that, right? But they were very busy, and I thought they did awesome. They brought in Duchesne, which I thought was a great fit. I thought was the number 1 centerman out there that everybody wanted to get. You had teams like Winnipeg that needed a centerman. Nashville is after him. There was a couple other teams that were out there trying to scoop up Duchesne, and the last team I ever thought he was going to go to was Columbus. But bam, there he ends up. And to go along with him, they also had sent Ryan Dzingel. in a separate trade there.
Which was amazing to see. I mean, one day and one the next day, right? It was a strange sight to see. And the rumor out there was that they actually tried to get all three of the big names out of Ottawa, and the price was just too much, right? They tried to get Stone in a package deal. So very interesting to see Columbus do that.
Yeah, it was. I definitely think that it really helps out their team for the push, and I'm kind of undecided as to, I honestly think, who's won the deadline, but I think that they're one of my favorites for that, but we'll talk about that later.
Sure.
Another big trade that happened I thought that's worth talking about was the, well, it's not as big, but the Bruins and Wild made a very unique trade.
Yeah, let's start with that one. The Coyle with Danton, right?
Donato.
Or Donato. Yeah, Donato.
I thought that was very good because Charlie Coyle was in Boston back in the day, correct?
Charlie Coyle?
Yes.
I believe he's a Boston kid. I'd have to look that up. But.
And so at first I thought it was just kind of a minor third liner trade. But for the Wild, I think it's really helped them out. Donato's come over there now in 4 games. He's got 6 points with them. He's on fire playing on the second line there.
And they're doing well, right?
I thought that was kind of interesting that the Wild traded away Mikael Granlund.
Yeah, we could talk about that one a little bit later too.
You know, for a team that seems to be right there on the bubble, I thought that they might try to acquire somebody as well to make a push.
I think that had to do in large part to Koivu getting injured.
Yeah.
And I think they were not necessarily pushing all their chips in and folding their cards by any means. Mm-hmm. I think they were just saying if they can, basically what they probably were saying is if we can make it this year, great. If not, let's reset for next year. I mean, they re-signed Stahl just after the deadline because he didn't want to go anywhere. So,
do you think that they looked into acquiring players like Stone and Duchesne and they just felt that the price was too high? And so that's kind of where they went this other route?
Possibly. And I mean, I'm not as familiar with their prospect cupboards, so I don't know how much depth they have in terms of high-end prospects. I don't know if they have the pieces to have been in any of those serious trade talks over a guy like Stone or a guy like Hayes, which obviously the prices were very high. It was definitely a seller's market. You know, you look at what some of these guys got for their players. You know, a guy like Hayes, he got a first rounder and Brendan Lemieux. And then you look at Stone, they got probably one of the best prospects in hockey, and we can talk about these in a little bit too as we break them down. But with Stone, they got Vegas sent Brunstrom over to Ottawa.
Right.
And he's supposed to be one of the best defensive prospects out in the world. So prices were high. So for Minnesota, I think it was a matter of they just weren't willing to, or they were unable to have the pieces to move to be in those serious trade talks.
And Donato and Coyle are 2 younger players, but they're separate. They play on separate levels. Charlie Coyle likes to play a bit of a more aggressive game, get in your face type guy. Mm-hmm. And Donato's a very, very skilled player who I think is one day probably going to be a top 6 forward guy. You know, I think that he can definitely fill in for what Mikael Granlund did before. He's just started. He's been having a hard time. He's still only 22 years old. Yeah. But he's just going to be a late blossomer. But he oozes a talent at times on Boston. He's just not as consistent.
Right. He's still got to find that consistency, and maybe that's why they traded for Donato. Maybe they had that in mind that they were possibly going to move Mikael Granlund. So they brought in a young player like that, right, to take the reins and possibly be that next wave when guys like Stahl, who, like I said, just signed, when those guys move on, when Koivu, who's not young by any means anymore, when those guys move on, they need some young guys. So I think that was a good, and it's been good for both teams. Like you said, Minnesota's 4-0, Boston is 3-0-1 since the trade. Mm-hmm. With the crazy thing about Boston, they've beaten San Jose and Tampa Bay on back-to-back games. So I mean, they're firing on all cylinders right now. And although Coyle hasn't contributed any points yet, I don't think.
No.
I think he'll be a good fit there heading into the playoffs. So I think it was a win-win trade.
And so what do you think about the other half of what Minnesota did over the deadline there? They also made another deal with Nashville and acquired Kevin Fiala for Mikael Granlund. What's your take on that?
That one was puzzling to me. Mikko Granlund is not an old guy by any means. So I was surprised that they were willing to move him, and they were moving some other bigger names. Jason Zucker was, the rumors out there that there was a deal that was done to Calgary that didn't go through because it didn't get to Central Registry, which we can talk about that. There's something I had a thought on that. We can talk about that after this too. In terms of Granlund though, it was a surprise to me. Because Fiala, I haven't followed Fiala's career really closely, but I don't think he's on the same offensive level as Granlund. So I thought that they would maybe get a little bit more back for a Mikko Granlund than they did. What do you think?
Here's what I thought. Kevin Fiala is still a very young player. He's only 22 years old. And Mikko Granlund is 27. I think that from the reports I've read on him and some video I've watched about him, I think he shows great playmaking ability. Fiala does. And I think he is a future Granlund type player.
Could very well be.
And for Nashville, it gives them a player that Fiala is going to be in about 5 years now.
Well, it makes perfect sense for them.
Which will help them.
It makes perfect sense to them. And think about what Nashville added leading up to the deadline and on deadline day. They added Brian Boyle a couple weeks before the deadline, right? Or at least a few, maybe not a couple weeks, but in advance. They added Cody McLeod, which is a good depth move for him in case of injuries in the playoffs, because we all know that that's a big thing. You need more forwards. You need about 8 to 10 defensemen to make it through, the grind that is the 4-round playoffs. Mm-hmm. So they added them, and then obviously on deadline day, adding Simmons and Granlund. Mm-hmm. Nashville hasn't had a very good last 10 games. So that adding these depth pieces is going to be huge for them, I think. And it's going to help because they're going to, the road for them leads through Winnipeg.
Well, it's the experience for now. And Granlund is a guy who's going to bring playoff experience, with his years experience and his talent level. He brings a nice piece to the game there in Nashville.
I agree.
Definitely gives them an extra bit of an edge.
I agree, yeah.
Sticking with Nashville now.
Yeah.
Because Nashville also made a trade with Philadelphia for Wayne Simmons for Ryan Hartman and a 4th-round pick, I believe, or something like that.
Yeah, there was a pick involved there going the other way, too.
What do you think of that one? Do you think Wayne Simmons is a good fit for Nashville? I
do. He's not the Wayne Simmons that, of a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. What he can still do, though, he has the intangibles like leadership that don't go away. And he's a net front presence, right? They have some good weapons in Nashville, and Johansson, obviously Forsberg, guys like that. So to have a big body like Simmons who will crash and bang and do the dirty work is a good fit for them. I think it would have been awesome if they'd had him 2 to 3 seasons ago. Right. However, it's still a good deal. He's still got some hockey left in him, and he's good for a playoff push. He can play anywhere from your 4th to your 2nd line, I think. So a good fit. You combine it with some of their other moves. I think the way I look at Nashville is you can't look at any one of their moves individually. You look at all 2 or 3 or 4 of their big moves leading up to the deadline as a collective. And if you look at it that way, then I think they made out really well. Because like I said, that West is going to be tough because you got...
Well, they've added that size they need for the penalty killing extra bit. Well, Brian Boyle, right?
And think about whoever's going to come out of that Western Conference for the Stanley Cup. If you want to look at the top 5 elite teams that we've talked about in the past, there's going to be Vegas, San Jose, Calgary, Winnipeg, Nashville.
Right.
That's going to be a tough first 3 rounds of the playoffs for whoever comes out of that Western Conference. So I think adding those guys is big.
Absolutely. They pair up well, I think, in all formats where they can use Wayne Simmons on the 3rd line, which is fine. And he gets to slot in some first power play time, which makes sense because he's the big body they want standing in front of the net, Adding Mikko Granlund is also just another absolute playmaker. who's
Yeah.
going to be able to spot Simmons, stand in front of the net for those dirty little tip-ins, bounces, and stuff like that. I really love what Nashville's done here at the deadline with their team. The only thing that ever puzzles me is, well, not puzzles me, but the thing that I have a problem with is when you bring guys from the east to the west.
It could be a tough adjustment.
There's a bit of an adjustment period there.
It's like in baseball, going from the American League, not to the same extent, but going from the American League to the National League, there's some differences.
Like Brian Boyle, he's okay with it because the guy's flip-flopped every year for the last 5 years.
Right.
He can adjust. But a guy like Wayne Simmons, I think it's going to be a hard adjustment for him there. You're not going to see him do much for the first probably 10 games as he gets used to playing all those guys over there.
It's going to be more about what he's going to do in the playoffs.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what they're grooming him towards. Keeping him down on the third line now is great. He gets a little bit of time to play, 13 minutes a game, probably 15 minutes, and just gets used to the West Coast swing and the travel and such. And then by playoff time, I think he's going to be great, and he's going to be a standout there for Nashville.
Good point. I think that's a very good take on it. So one of the other trades I thought we'd talk about real quick, and we don't have to dive into it too much, I think that could be the sleeper trade of the deadline. It was made probably well in advance of everyone else, was Nino Niederreiter going from Minnesota to Carolina, kind of sticking in some of the teams we've been talking about. Mm-hmm. I was looking at some of his stats today. So obviously his was well in advance. He's actually played 17 games already with Carolina, and he's added some good scoring depth for them. The guy has, in the 17 games, I think he has something like 9 goals and 5 or 6 assists. He's about 15 points in 17 games. Mm-hmm. So I think that could be one of the sleeper deals of the deadline where, we've talked about this, you and I too, where a lot of the big deals at the deadline in the history of the NHL haven't really paid off. You haven't seen the cup winner be a team that made a big deal. It's been a team that's added some solid depth, and I think that this could be one of those things. So it was one that I found interesting looking back today as I was looking at some of the trades, and you kind of forgot about this one because it happened what seems like so long ago, a few weeks ago. So I think that Carolina, we were talking about, everybody was talking about how they need scoring depth, they need that help, and we never saw them move any of their big names, their right shot defensemen, like everybody thought they were going to. Mm-hmm. They did get Niederreiter though, and they were able to get him for I believe it was Victor Rask they got him for, who hasn't had quite the success in Minnesota that Niederreiter has had so far in Carolina. So I think that was a steal for Carolina and something to watch.
Yeah, it's a good one actually for a team that's really trying to make a push into that last playoff spot.
Yeah, they're fighting with Pittsburgh,
and definitely intriguing because I kind of had them as a team that were going to miss out, and it looked like they were just getting ready to sell off pieces.
Very much like Columbus.
Yeah. And it's funny that the East has so many good teams lined up there that it's kind of a shame that one or two of them are probably going to miss it because I think that they deserve a spot.
And imagine if it's Pittsburgh that misses.
Man, it might be.
It could be, very well could be. So, very interesting trade. So
yeah, that was a very good one. I think the other one too. There was another big name that moved. Did you hear of the Mark Stone trade here?
Yeah, that's a big one. We could spend some time on that one because that was the big one. And that was the one where everybody thought that would be the first domino to fall, and it ended up being almost one of the last dominoes to fall.
Well, perfect play by the Sens GM to do it, quite honestly.
There's been mixed reviews on that, though.
He held out for as long as possible to get exactly what he wanted. I'm sure.
So do you think that he got the best return that he could have?
Well, I'm going to say no, because now I'm thinking about it, but...
Yeah, that's what a lot of people were questioning, right, as to whether... Did he wait too long? Did the offers drop because the suitors that were coming after Stone dropped? As Winnipeg, when Winnipeg traded for Hayes, when other teams dropped out as it went along, did that force them kind of into a corner where they only had one or two dance partners in terms of who to trade with? So we don't, like I said, we don't know either about that, right?
Well, that's a very good one. I tend to think that, you kind of see what other teams gave up in order to get their players. Like when you're looking at Winnipeg getting Kevin Hayes, they gave up a first and Brandon Lemieux for Kevin Hayes. And Brandon Lemieux is a great prospect and a young player, and he's going to be good in the NHL. When you look at what Nashville was giving up, they gave up Hartford and Fiala, which are great, right? Yeah. But I think when you're looking at it also from the Senators prospect pool, that they lack the defense.
Yeah, I mean, they have Shabbat. Other than that, though, they don't really have a lot, so Brunstrom's a good ad.
It goes, just let me look back here real quick. But
the other thing, too, while you're looking there, we've kind of forgot to talk about Ryan Hartman, that other side of that deal that went to Philly. I don't know if did you see his first game in Philly there? He actually, I mean, talk about a guy endearing himself to his teammates and fans, throwing big hits, got into a fight his first game there. So, he looks like a guy who will fit that Philly mold.
Who's this, sir?
Ryan Hartman.
Ryan Hartman?
Yeah, the player went back for
I love Ryan
Wayne
Hartman.
Simmons.
I think he's a great little fit there.
Good player.
He's going to be a good third line kind of guy, and he's going to bring some. He loves to play a fast game with lots of hits and the up tempo.
Good replacement for Wayne Simmons.
Yeah, I totally think I actually called him a Wayne Simmons Jr. in my notes.
He's not going to win you a scoring title, but yeah, exactly.
No, he won't. Yeah,
he's
going to be a great guy that's going to fit in that team perfectly for years to come.
Yeah, play a heart and soul type of game. So
I'm just looking back now at the Senators and as to what they really needed.
And get back to the Stone trade, yeah.
And I really thought that they would have held on to Ryan Dzingel because I really think he is a top end talent. I think that other than, like you said, Nina Ryder, I think that the other steal at the end of this day in the trades was going to be Ryan Dzingel.
Could very well be a sleeper pickup for sure.
He's been a guy who's been playing like third line minutes in Ottawa all year long, and he's deserved better. I thought he would be a building chop going forward, but I guess not. They still have Brady Tkachuk and Colin White up front. They have a lot of other good depth up there too that's coming. It's on the back end where they got Thomas Chabot, and then it kind of drags off from there to Danilo, LaJoie, and Cody Ceci.
Who many thought was going to move to Cody Ceci.
They have Batherson.
Yeah, he's a good prospect, Canadian kid.
Who I believe is a D-man, or is he a forward?
He's a forward.
Forward.
Yeah.
And then they also have their prospect, Christian Wolanin, who's a defenseman in there as well, who probably comes up in the next year. I don't see... I think that the Ottawa Senators played this out perfectly for them in getting the chips they did and all the picks they did to help them rebuild faster. I really don't see this as a team that's going to need a full 5 years to flip this thing around. Getting a elite prospect in Aaron Brandstrom, I think, was awesome for them, though, really.
Oh, you mean the player that came over from Vegas?
Yeah.
Brunstrom there. Yeah, like I said to you, Brunstrom, I mean, he's according to a lot of the experts, he's probably the best prospect in hockey right now. So that was definitely a big get for Ottawa. So, a lot of people were surprised that they didn't, and that's why I said to you before, did they get the best deal they could? Because a lot of people were surprised that they didn't get a first-round pick. When, in essence, they got two for Duchesne, along with a couple decent prospects, and Stone, all they got was Brunstrom and then a second. I think the fact that they got Brunstrom is what made it so that they didn't get a first from Vegas. Mm-hmm. I think Brunstrom is that much of a dynamic prospect that he was the crowning jewel for them, and he'll add to like you said, an already impressive prospect pool. Things look fairly bleak in Ottawa right now. We know all the situations that have happened. We know everything going on with their arena. We know how much the fans don't like the management and ownership right now. I think if the fans, though, look at the prospects that they have and where they could go in the future, they should be happy with that. Although it'll probably take them a couple seasons to get over the fact that they're probably going to lose out on one of the top guys, whether it's Jack Hughes coming up this year.
Yeah,
that's a tough pill to swallow.
But let's just look at. I just wanted to find this really quick because I didn't want to be talking on my butt about it. But Eric Brandstrom, he was the defenseman for Sweden this year for the World Juniors.
Right.
For a team that's been phenomenal, and he was the backbone of that team on defense. He had 4 goals in 5 games. 3 of them came on the power play, so he can quarterback that there. He's a very, very skilled defenseman, and I think that one day in the very, very, very near future, he's going to pencil in, and he's going to be an elite backhand piece they're going to have back there.
Yeah, and I mispronounced his name there. I was saying Brunstrom, but you're right, it is Brandstrom. So I think, and they added
as
another
for Mark
piece.
Stone going to Vegas, this is my problem here
That's
too
huge.
with the move from the east to the west. Just give him time, Vegas, and he will come through, and he will be a big difference maker there for a team.
I think so too. I mean, look at their lineup now with Mark Stone in it. They got a first line. I mean, it's 1A, 1B now, in my opinion. I don't think you can label either line their first line. If you go back to last season, though, like their first season, and so far this season, what's listed on paper as their first line as Riley Smith, William Karlsson, and Jonathan Marchessault.
Yeah, which I think is a great line.
It's a great line, and I think they'll be good in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. Then you look at their second line. Look at that. Like, it's scary. Pacioretty, Stastny, and Mark Stone now.
Here's what I think is going to happen. Is I think once the playoffs get going, they're going to have to go. And even before then, I think Stone's going to move up to the first line and play along with William Karlsson and Marchessault, because both those guys need a boost. And I think that Stone needs a boost to be on a brand new team as well. I think that would be a very smart move for that coach to finally put those three together eventually here.
Could be a good fit.
And when you look at their power play, I'm sure they're on the power play together. Yeah. So, but for a while, I think they'll put those three together to find some chemistry and get Mark Stone used to playing on the team and get him some points.
Yeah.
And I think it could also, boost Marchessault and Karlsson's confidence out there. They're not putting up the same points they did last year. Although
they've had a slower year for sure.
It really is hard to reduplicate what Karlsson did last year himself too.
It is, yeah. So with that said, we've covered off most of the big trades. I think the last one we could touch on is Kevin Hayes to Winnipeg. You and I both talked about this a little bit, and you made the point that he would be the ideal guy to go to Winnipeg to be to center the line with Laine.
Yeah.
Obviously that happened. I think it's going to be a big move for Winnipeg. There's a Stastny move.
You could see that move coming from a mile away.
You could.
Kevin Hayes was just a better fit there than Duchesne was.
Yeah, and better fit than Mark Stone probably was.
Well, they needed a centerman. I didn't understand the reason as to why they wanted to go after him. Yeah, I think it's just to have the guy there.
Just have him there, and he's a Winnipeg kid.
But you needed the centerman.
You did, and I think they made the smart move in that sense.
And what helps you off better, right? And I think that Kevin Hayes will help them down the road better than Stone would. Yeah.
So taking all these trades into account, I think we can probably close out with talking about.
Hold on.
Yeah.
One last one I have to talk about.
Sure.
Just really quickly. I got to talk about the Leafs and the Winnipeg Jets, because as though it didn't seem like a huge move, I think that it's really helped Maple Leafs rejuvenate the team a little bit. And they traded Lars Eller, or Pars Lindholm for
Nick Petan, right?
Nick Petan, that's right. And it just opened up the door for Trevor Moore to come up from the AHL affiliate team. And that fourth line has been totally rejuvenated and looked like a much better team. So from any Toronto Maple Leaf fans out there, I think that that was the missing piece that they needed on their back end of their lineup.
And like we talked about,
a big difference.
Like we talked about, right? It's not those big moves that make the difference. Usually it's those small moves that nobody really pays attention to that ends up being one of the key pieces to winning a cup.
And now more Tyler Ennis and Gauthier are playing together, and they've been a phenomenal line to watch. Lindholm is a great player, and he's very defensively minded and is an excellent shutdown guy to have. Then I know Babcock loved his play for that. I know he will be missed for that, but to bring that energy to the fourth line is perfect, and I think it'll really help out. Yeah. One last one I also really want to quickly talk about.
Definitely, yeah, we got all the time in the world.
But just quickly, because I think Penguins fans feel like they got stung a little bit, stiffed maybe, on this whole trade line thing. But I think that bringing in Eric Gudbranson,
Eric Gudbranson,
is a good fit for now, with a team that's riddled with injuries on the back end. And missing Oli Mata, Letang, Dumoulin is really tough for that team, especially when they're trying to make a push.
And it's tough to lose a guy like Tanner Pearson.
Yeah.
However, and I read this today as well, and we've obviously we haven't got to talk about all the trades because there's not enough time. One of the other trades that happened was Columbus getting Mcdavid from New York. I think that both that move and this move with Goodbranson coming to Pittsburgh, I think that they were both made with Tom Wilson in mind. So if either of those teams makes the playoffs, they're going to have to probably face Washington, and they're going to have to deal with a guy like Tom Wilson. And really, there was nobody on either of those teams that could stand up to him and do that. And now both those teams have a guy in Mcdavid for Columbus and Goodbranson for Pittsburgh. So I agree with your point. I think it was on paper they lost a little bit in that trade. However, it was filling a need.
Yeah. So quickly, who do you think won in the end?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you too a little bit. That if I was going to nail out winners and losers. We don't have to talk about losers so much because I don't think there really was a necessarily a loser with any of the trades that happened or didn't happen. I think that this is one of those. It was a really rare deadline in that everybody kind of did what they needed to do or didn't do what they didn't need to do. You know what I mean? Everybody kind of did the right thing. Mm-hmm. So in terms of the winners for me, I would say Winnipeg was a big winner. They didn't have to go out there and swing for the fences. I mean, they gave up a lot for Kevin Hayes. I think it was the right fit for them. And they made the smart choice. They didn't get blinded by the lights that came with a Mark Stone and make the wrong choice, which I'm not saying it would have been. He would have been a great player for them. So I think they're one of the winners. And also I would say Vegas, adding Mark Stone because I think it was the right fit. And they had the cap space to sign him beyond this season, which obviously their talk is that there already is a contract in place, just needed to wait till after today to do it. So I think those two teams were the big winners out west. Out east, I think Boston was one. As much as Leafs fans don't want to hear me say that, I think that Boston made some stealth moves that will definitely give them some grit and some depth as they head into the playoffs.
Right.
And they're on a roll right now, so I don't think they wanted to mess with chemistry too much. I'd also say that out east, Tampa Bay was a winner because they didn't mess with a good thing.
Well, that's a good point.
It was tempting probably for them to make some moves. I think though that they did the right thing. They have everything in place, and sometimes the best move is no move at all. So, how about you? What did you think for winners? Who won the deadline for you?
Well, I'm going to look at two teams. I think I like how you pointed it out there, but one team that just that saved their season and made sure that I think that they're going to make the playoffs, and that's the Columbus Blue Jackets. From the East, I think the odds of everything from even, like you said, McLeod, Kincaid, Duchesne, and Dzingel, I think that just kind of rejuvenated that team and gave them a spark where I think they all thought that this roller coaster was slowly dying out and it was going to come to an end, that they probably weren't going to make the playoffs. But the front office moves and the management and what they've done, I thought is amazing and nobody saw it coming. So I think that helps that team make a push into the playoffs here now.
Yeah, before we go any further though, what do you think with Columbus? Touch on that real quick before we close out. What do you think about the fact that most of these guys are free agents at the end of the season and they could all walk away and have nothing left to show for it?
Well, I think they're taking that chance, but I feel like the idea here is if they can show them that we have a quality product that we can put on the ice, and let's say they make it into the second round this year, that even further proves it to that entire core that, like, hey, this is something we can really build on next year. And everybody wants to be in it to win it, you know? So from the point of Duchesne and Dzingel, especially Dzingel wants to be a top six forward. If Columbus can guarantee him that, I see him staying there. If Duchesne wants to be a second line centerman, I think that's perfect for him too. I think he really fits into that spot very, very well. He's a very elite second line centerman to have. He can definitely play first line center if needed, but having him on the second line just would open up that entire unit to take advantage of everything else out there.
Good points.
They definitely threw all their cards in, hoping for something good, you know, obviously.
Yeah.
And I think now, even with these moves, I think they show to Panarin that it's worth staying around. And I think he should, second guess leaving if they can try to keep some of these pieces there.
Yeah, some good points. So sorry to interrupt you there. I just thought I'd get your thoughts on that. So other team that you think's a winner, won the deadline?
The other teams that I thought were the winner coming out of the West, Dallas was actually a winner, even though Matt Zuccarello unfortunately broke his arm blocking his shot.
They kind of went from winner to loser pretty quick there, unfortunately.
And they did think about adding another piece right away to fill in for this injury, but they figured it wasn't worth it.
With the prices the way they were.
Yeah, I think if they can just hold on to the playoff position here, that he'll definitely be a good suitor for him. He came in and already had a goal and assist before the third period started in his first game in a Dallas uniform. So, I mean, he definitely looks like he's an awesome fit there, and he will find a home there long term. As for that, I think the real winners out in the West, not to take a cop out from your page of the book, but I think the Calgary Flames didn't make any major moves, and I didn't think they had to.
Yeah, I think that they put their faith in the core that they have.
Yeah.
And their future. I mean, obviously now it's come out over a day or two after the deadline that the main piece that everybody asked for from them was their defensive prospect, Juuso Välimäki, who stepped right into the NHL at the beginning of the season from juniors and played very well. So it was a piece that they weren't really willing to move. So whether or not I think they're a sleeper team. I think that there's some question marks there that we'll see if they prove themselves in the playoffs. Everybody's counting them out, though.
Well, they've won now 7 games in a row or something like that, right?
It's 7 games in a row, I believe, yeah.
And the top line has been fairly quiet there. And they're winning all these games with their second, third, fourth line guys.
They're getting some depth scoring contributions from everyone. Which
is crazy to think here. So when the playoffs get going and this first line fires back up and gets going, they're going to be very good, and I think they're still the team to beat out west.
Good point and good take. So I think that that is everything for us. We kind of covered all the points we want to cover, and we were happy to come back for a third episode and continue to do some more. Just remind everybody as we sign off here, if you like what you're hearing and you want to know more, give us a follow on Twitter. Our handle there is @NeutralZoneCDN. And also you can go to Facebook. It's just search the Neutral Zone Canada. You'll find us on there as well. If you want to catch any of our episodes, you can listen to them on iTunes. Everything, like I said, will be under the Neutral Zone Canada. So iTunes, we have a channel on YouTube. You can catch it there. And we're also available on Google Play. So please go listen to our episodes. We have 2 that we've recorded previously. And also give us a follow, give us a like, comment, give us some feedback. If you have any topics you want us to discuss on future episodes, let us know that too, and we'll be happy to do that. So appreciate the time, Mark, and was excited to do another trade deadline one. Our next episode will probably focus on something different. But other than that, any closing remarks?
That's it, man. I had a great blast this week, and I can't wait to do it again next year.
I think so. Like I said earlier, if you cross Mark Peterson on the ice, be careful. He'll score on you, and then he'll drop the gloves with you. So watch out for that beast, man. Other than that, that's us signing off. Thanks again, folks.
Peace.